My name is Jessica Gray, and I'm the lead literacy consultant for Step Up Consulting. Today, we're going to be talking about writing standards-based RSP goals. We're going to review the why behind RSPs and how they got started. I'm going to hopefully show you a good connection between reading development and the Missouri Learning Standards. And we're also going to be giving you a process for writing standards-based RSP goals within your own district. So reading success plans came out of Missouri Senate Bill 681. It's a great bill if you've ever got a chance to look at it. There's a lot of really interesting things kind of thrown within that bill, and reading success plans were one of them. We know that reading success plans came about as this need of addressing our severe deficiencies in reading in our school districts, not just in Missouri, but as a nation. And this is how Missouri decided they were going to tackle that issue, was through reading success plans. So the state in this bill gave the DESE a list of things that they needed to implement within our school districts. And then DESE came out with a guidance document to help schools navigate through that process. So DESE's definition of an RSP is a well-developed and defined plan to support students who exhibit a substantial deficiency in reading. You typically hear them now as SRDs, so substantial reading deficiency. It's what you might have heard that term just within your own district in talking about RSPs and dealing with those with your students who are showing those deficiencies in reading. RSPs are a great tool to use to help you pinpoint reading strengths and weaknesses. We know that not all students struggle in every area of reading, so we can really utilize these plans to help us pinpoint exactly what gaps students have and in what areas, and how to best address those for those students. The other thing RSPs are meant for is to help bridge the gap between home and school, and really trying to bring back that connection of we need our kids reading at home, our parents need literacy at home, and what are we going to do to help our parents close these reading gaps? So there are so many components to the RSP process and the things you have to have, but today we're just going to take a small chunk of that and focus just on goals. So I pulled some of the things out of the guidance document and I listed those page numbers next to the little blurbs. And I just kind of wanted to focus some of our attention on how the state is defining what you are doing for goals and goal writing. They updated their guidance doc in August of 2024. And they kind of changed some of the language and guidance and direction that was given specific for goal writing and the things that districts needed to make sure they included. So this first little blurb is really talking about growth goals, which is something that some of you may reference these as growth targets. And there was a little confusion, I feel like, when that first came out on what it was that we needed to have to show that growth. And just pulling this blurb out, I just wanted to make a point that it says when the assessment that is given to a student identifies a skill defect, multiple data points for that specific skill and or that associated skills, we need to make sure that we are determining an intervention plan that is surrounded by those defects. So that is where their goals should be centered around. So once they're defined, right, we start that, but we have to make sure that we're revising and updating those continually so that our students aren't getting stagnant. We aren't just making one goal and that's the goal for the year, but we really need to be revisiting, are they meeting goals? Are we moving past them? And how is that supposed to look? And what do we use to guide what comes next? The next blurb I wanted to point out was just this connection between Missouri Learning Standards and our Senate bill. So this little blurb says the body of evidence addresses the progression of skills and interconnectedness of the components of reading. So just making sure that everything you're gathering on that student is specific. Are we getting specific data to understand where their breakdown in reading is occurring? And then that Senate Bill 681 and Missouri Learning Standards provide guidance for skills at each of these grade levels. This is a great indication that we need to be looking to these documents to help us understand how are we moving students from one point to the next, and what are we going to do to keep moving them forward. So we're going to give you this process today. This process was actually developed by me and a partner teacher of mine through Pleasant Hope Schools. That's where I came out of before I took this position with Step Up. And we navigated, I was there with them as a Title I reading teacher through that very first big year of RSPs. And so we were all navigating the unknown together. And we developed this to help us really make the process quick and for us to help our teachers understand where we were moving students to. I had a lot of third and fourth grade teachers with students with first and second grade reading levels and even lower. And they had never taught first or second grade. They didn't know what to do. What do we do with these kids? What am I supposed to do to help hit these deficiencies when they're in my small groups? And we thought this is the best way to do that. Shauna had came and done a presentation with us, and we really worked as a district on aligning what standards we were teaching, and we noticed a lot of gaps. And so we said, this is where we're going to start. We're going to start by using the standards the state's given us, our assessment that we have to give kids that qualify them for an RSP, our standardized assessments that we know are based off the standards. So we know that being able to help our kids master the standards is only going to help them benefit through that assessment also, and help us give our teachers a pinpoint of where we're moving them for reading. So we're going to go through that process today. So the first step is identifying the standard or skill that your student is deficient in. So not only are we starting with that foundational reading assessment, right? That's the very first thing all of our students have to do before we start this RSP process, but we're giving that. And these assessments are really robust. They're giving us a lot of data. Sometimes that data, though, isn't something we can just take and run with. We know how many updates and things that they're doing, though, to help get us some of that information, which is fantastic. But the big thing is these are all standardized assessments. You are not listening to the kids read. It is really important, and we recommend, and I know that the state would recommend, because they say it multiple times in their document, that you should be giving a robust amount of things to have for their backing or their data pool collection for these students, but giving them more than one assessment. Don't just give them the foundational reading assessment and stop there and say, hey, they told me it was phonemic awareness they're struggling in, or it's their Lexile level, or it's their XYZ. If it's their Lexile level, that doesn't give us a whole lot of information other than we know that they're behind in grade level on reading, but what specifically is it? So this is where these other assessments can come in. We aren't saying you should give all of your students these assessments, but those kids that qualify for an RSP through the foundational reading assessment should be given other things, specifically ones that are having you listen to them read so that you can really understand where it is that they are on these reading continuums. So just some suggestions that we have found really helpful, that other districts have found helpful information, is spelling inventories. These are really great to give students to know whether or not they have those vowel teams mastered, or if they're hearing all the sounds in words as they're writing. Letters phonics assessment. A lot of us have went through that letters training and know how beneficial those assessments can be. The PASS test for phonemic awareness is fantastic, and DIBELS. These are all ones that are free that you can find and be able to utilize within your district or your own students in your classroom as you're trying to determine what is the specific skill or standard that my students need to have to be able to to keep going and move forward and improve their reading skills. So the next thing then would be to determine, where do those skills, like where do they fall? Where's their present level? I know I've given them all these assessments. I know what they're struggling with and where they lie, but where does that line up to the Missouri Learning Standards? And this is where those vertical progressions come in. Looking at the state standards and how those vertical progressions and how those standards progress is going to be your best bet when trying to determine where is it that we're going to start with goal writing when it comes to standards-based goal writing. So we have utilized our vertical alignment. So if you're a Step Up client, I'm going to show you that process of using our vertical alignments, but you can still utilize the standards as well. So where do they fall? This is just kind of bringing that back home to show you that it is imperative, and this comes straight from the guidance document, that it is necessary to understand where students fall. And then this blurb here also makes that point of they could land anywhere on this literacy continuum. They may be a fourth grader reading on a first grade level. They may be a fourth grader doing lots of really great things on grade level, but they're still struggling in a few other areas. So it's really important that we know where our students are on this reading continuum and how we can help them push forward. So here's just an example or in a graphic that we've created to help give you a visual of that reading continuum. We start really early on, right, with vocabulary. Kids are listening to us speak as they're babies. They're learning language. They're gaining comprehension from things we're saying, stories we're reading to them. We move into print awareness, where they're starting to understand that things are written and they can read them, how books work, sounds and language, how they work. And then you move into phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. How can your students manipulate sounds? Are they able to do that? Are they able to utilize different parts of speech to utilize their sounds and know that words are made of sounds? And then we move into phonics, bringing that orthography right, our writing, letters connected to those sounds, fluency, such a big one, reading independently and then reading on grade level. And where do our students fall? So we can take their data, analyze it, and determine, man, I really notice a huge gap in their phonemic awareness ability. That's probably where we need to start. Are they likely suffering from phonics, fluency, reading independently? Absolutely. But we want to start where the lowest pinpoint is, right? We know they're struggling phonemic awareness. We have to start at that building block and keep going up. So if your student, this is an example of our vertical progression for phonics. If your student's struggling in phonics, we can look at, okay, they're really working, it says from our foundational reading assessment, they're about a first grade level, kindergarten level, and maybe this is a second grade student or even a third grade student. And we know, okay, we're going to start with phonics. So I pull up this vertical progression for phonics, and it starts in kindergarten, producing and writing letters. Hey, my kid can do that. I gave them a spelling inventory. They know how to write their letters. They know most of their consonant vowel sounds. They're working on blending letters to decode simple words. Hey, they can do that. I sat and listened to them. I gave them that letters phonics assessment. I've listened to them read. I know they can blend and do short words. Can they recognize that new words can be created? Yes, I've sat with them and I've seen them manipulate. I've seen them change that middle sound or that beginning sound to make a new word. They can do those things. But then we get into the first grade section. Are they able to decode words in context, right, within the reading by using letter sound knowledge? Well, this is kind of a tricky one because they can do it sometimes, but not all the time, right? And so maybe our phonics inventory showed that they really don't have a strong grasp on the difference between short and long vowel sounds. They're really not doing blends very well. Maybe they're not doing digraphs, right? So we can kind of move through this continuum and say, man, they're doing this, but not this and this and this. So we can really see, hey, here's our gaps. This is where we need to attack when it comes to our goal setting and the things we're going to be doing in intervention. Why priority standards? So we really recommend that you focus to write your growth goal on a priority standard. And we do that because priority standards are these big ideas that encompass many of your supporting standards. The state brought these out post-COVID and had a great team of educators across the state help them develop what is priority and what standards are going to help students progress. You can see that this little caption here is from the DESE website on priority standards, and talking about that priority standards are those big ideas that are highlighted, right? And we want mastery of those because they're going to help students as they grow through their learning continuum as they move through grade levels. So it's imperative that we have these mastered. And so utilizing these as our goals is going to help you and your teachers see, this is my end game. This is my growth target. I want to see growth in this area. And I'm going to do all of these little things to help, right? I want my students to be able to decode words in context using letter sound knowledge. So I'm going to make sure that I go step by step and say, can they identify short and long vowel? If they can't, we're going to spend a week or two working on this in tier 2. Then I'm going to move to consonant blends, then digraphs. And we're just going to keep moving through these until they have all these mastered. So when they have these mastered, we know they're going to have this growth target mastered because that is where we want to see them. And then once this growth target's mastered, what happens? We're going to go to second grade. And if they're a third grade student, we're going to keep going through this continuum, right? Getting them through all of these things they need mastered so that they can be independent and reading on grade level. That's one of the reasons I love looking at the standards and helping us see that in game. We know where they need to be and what do we need to do to get them there. And sometimes when we are thinking standards-based, a lot of our teachers haven't taught lower elementary that are having students with RSPs. And so it's really important that we give them the access to know this is what we have to teach them and where they're moving to. So step 2, after we determine where students are in that continuum, knowing what their skill defects are, we're going to go into step 2, which is defining proficiency of the standard in the skill. When we talk about doing standards-based RSP goals, it's really important that everyone's on the same page. We know that lots of times we read a standard and it can be really open to interpretation on what mastery might look like. When do I know my student has this mastered? What level of ability should they be doing at the rigor level, right, to show mastery? And that can be different for every teacher when it's left open to interpretation. But it's really important that we work together as a team in your district to determine what mastery is so that all kids are held to that same standard and we're all at that level of expectancy. And one great way to do that is looking at item specs, research developmental theories, and then map released items even. Looking at these things helps us understand what the state is expecting of the rigor, but also what your assessments you're giving your students are going to expect. We have written proficiency scales for all of the Missouri Learning Standards, including supporting. So if you're a current client, we're working on adding those supporting ones in too, to make sure that every standard has a scale that we can give you to help you understand and show mastery, to show exactly what it is that the state expects a student to be able to do for that specific standard. So these are all great tools to help you understand that and get everybody on the same page. We want to make sure that all of our students that we see, especially those with these reading deficiencies, have that opportunity to have the right thing given to them, the right tools given to them so that they can have that mastery and keep moving forward. So other factors to consider as you're looking at determining proficiency and determining what it is that's going to show mastery at that particular level for your students on those standards. Does your district have a determined progression of certain skills? So for example, this is out of our map book, but when we're talking about consonant blends, one of the content limits that is given in the item specs is that it is determined by individual districts how that progresses. So it's really important to sit down and look at the assessments you're giving your students and determining whether or not they're making growth. Are the things that are on this assessment, have they been things explicitly taught to them? Because if they haven't, we need to either reorganize our scope and sequence to make sure we are introducing that before the assessment, or we need to think about looking at a different assessment that aligns more with our scope and sequence. So it's really important that you have the same scope and sequence throughout so that your district and your students are all on that same page and all on that level of expectancy for what it is they need to know. Do your resources between grade levels align? This is another really big one where maybe your kindergarten team's using one resource for phonics and your first grade team's using another. That's fine, but do those scope and sequences align? Meaning, if we're teaching one resource, it may leave out consonant blends, but our first grade team thinks consonant blends should be being taught in kindergarten, right? And vice versa. So it's really, really important that we are looking at what is it that we're using as a district? What are those scope and sequences? And does it align with the next grade level? The next thing to consider also is, do your resources for your scope and sequences align with your assessments and your resources? What are you using in intervention? Are you using the same things that your interventionist is using in your classroom, or are those languages different? It's really important that we're looking across the board on what are we using, what language are we giving the kids, and what strategies are we giving them so that it's all consistent and streamlined, and that our students have a really easy way to notice and see that there's commonalities in every setting that they're in. That's only going to help their progression of learning. So the next step then is to create your goal or your growth target. The growth targets are written with a frame in mind, right? Almost like a SMART goal where we know, hey, we got an end game. We're going to reassess, check, how long is it going to take us? How much time are we giving our students for this? And things like that. So this is an example of one. The student will receive your targeted intervention. So how many minutes weekly, daily, who is going to be giving that intervention, using SOAR-based strategies, focusing on a specific standard, right? Or their specific skill defect. So I have just chosen, we can just pretend I gave a lot of assessments, and I'm choosing this goal for a third grade student who is struggling in reading based on all the data that I have been given for them. We need to develop phonics in the reading process by decoding words in context by using letter sound knowledge. So the goal I have written is by October 21st, the student will be able to produce the sounds of letters in isolation and while decoding. So that's my goal for the student. So the next piece of this is planning for that intervention. That step 4 is now what do we do? We have our goal, we've written it aligned to a standard. Now what do we do? So the next step here is we have to plan for intervention. So what skills is the student going to need to show mastery? What research-based ideas and practices should we be utilizing with students to help them reach that mastery? And what type of intervention is that student going to be receiving? So we know that within what our reporting system, that students could receive tier 2 instruction within the classroom setting and small group from their teacher. They could be utilizing tier 2 instruction outside of the classroom with a title or reading interventionist. Or we could be doing tier 3, right? One-on-one intervention with them. There's also after school tutoring on that list available, as well as summer and things like that. So how do we know that students are receiving what they need when they leave us? And it all comes down to their plan. So when we're talking about intervention, we want to make sure we're addressing how much time they're supposed to be receiving, who are they receiving it with, and what type of intervention, and then making sure it's focusing again back on the skills. What does our students need to know to be able to show that mastery? So when we look at this and we're planning for intervention, we want to look back to the standard and think, how do I unpack this standard? How do I know what are the things that build it up? Because if we're going to choose a priority standard and it's overarching, we know there's lots of other standards that build within that. So those are where I'm going to look to see, hey, can I address these certain things to make sure we meet mastery of that overarching priority? So when I'm looking at this particular one where they're going to produce sounds of consonant blends and digraphs in isolation while they're decoding, I can say, okay, if they're going to do this, the first week of intervention, we're going to work just on consonant digraphs. So we give that intervention, right? Well, I noticed, hey, they're doing really great based on my progress from monitoring data, but they still are really struggling with CH. So I'm going to make sure I need to continue that work. Well, they were really close. They've mastered everything but CH. So we're going to move on to producing those consonant digraphs while continuing that work on CH and identifying it. So then we notice, hey, we really struggled this week. We're going to work on SH and TH. They've got those mastered, but we're still struggling with WHCH when it comes to producing and maybe even identifying. So we're going to do that again. That's going to happen again the next week because we need more time. Our students need more time to master this sub skill of our overarching. So then they get that mastered. That's great. Now we're going to move on to identify and produce consonant blends, and the list just keeps going. The other graphic on this page is just an example of our student proficiency skills, which can help your teachers tremendously if you have our digital tools to be able to determine what do my kids need to be able to do to master this overarching standard and their growth target. So as we're looking, maybe our students, this would show mastery, right? If they were doing these two things, but maybe, okay, maybe they can identify consonant blends, but gosh, we need to start with digraphs, right? So maybe a different student didn't need consonant digraphs at first. They needed, or blends first, moving forward, right? We can always identify, hey, what are the things that are going to build to this? And if they've already have it mastered, move on to the next thing. We've got to keep moving, because if we're stagnant and we stay for 6 weeks at the same goal, working on the same sub skills, that's just not going to progress fast enough for our kids to be able to exit these plans. We know and utilize the standards to help us move quicker so that we know where our end game is. Not quicker as in we're rushing our kids through their continuum, right? We have to stay where they are and teach them till they have that mastery. But this just gives us an idea of, I don't have to stay here. I can move to the next standard. Once I have that one mastered, then I can go to the next one. And now I have a visual in my mind of where I'm going to move to next and how these are all connected into their reading development to show growth and how I'm going to move them up to hopefully grade level mastery. So some other things to consider when looking at this, utilizing that standard and mastery to help guide your intervention. What do we expect kids to be able to do at the levels of mastery? And then use that language again. Does your language and your resources that are used in tier 1, is that consistent with what you're using in tier 2? A lot of times our kids are not making the connections from tier 1 to tier 2 or tier 2 with our classroom teacher to our interventionist, because we're not using the same resources or even the same language to teach them about those skills. So it's really imperative that everybody's on the same page and we're utilizing that same language. So that was a really brief kind of introduction on how you can write standards-based RSP goals. If you want to know more, we're actually going to be presenting at Kale with Pleasant Hope. We're going to go over the RSP process that their district has went through and the growth that they've seen utilizing this process and this plan and some of our products. You might have noticed some of these graphics and things linked in here. This is a part of our RSP fast tracking tool. We have actually been working this year, if you're a current client or a current user, we are working on making some updates for the next school year coming up. So we're going to be kind of talking about and launching and demoing some of the things that we're in the works for updating on May 13th. And this is on our Missouri Instructional Leadership Network. So if you're not a part of that, make sure you sign up. And make sure that you register for this session because it's going to be a great one to look over and talk about. I just want to thank you again for listening in, and I hope this was helpful for you in your district. Again, my name is Jessica Gray, and you can always contact me at jessicag@stepupconsultingservices.com. You can always shout out or send me an email if you would like a demo. We can always demo or talk about anything that was in this video today and your process for writing standards-based RSP goals. And if you want to know more about the RSP fast tracking tool, just visit that link down at the bottom that says www.stepupconsultingservices.com/RSP/FTT for fast tracking tool. There's a video on there and a link for a way to sign up to do a session with me virtually. So if you have any interest in that, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks for your time.